The noise was the first thing that always struck him at these events. Not the music, a string quartet sawing politely through something Vivaldi-esque in the corner, nor the polite clinking of champagne flutes. It was the sound of money itself, a relentless, high-frequency hum of self-congratulation disguised as chatter. Julian Croft stood near a marble pillar, a ghost at a feast held in his own name, the guest of honor at the annual Croft Foundation Gala. He'd rather be anywhere else. He watched the city's elite mill about the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, their practiced smiles and glittering jewels reflecting the light of the crystal chandeliers. They were peacocks, all of them, displaying fortunes they hadn't earned to people they didn't like. And he paid for it all. He paid for the champagne, the microscopic hors d'oeuvres, the cavernous room. It was the penance he paid for his own success, a tax on his guilt. His gaze swept the room with a practiced detachment, cataloging, dismissing. Then he saw her. She was part of the children's choir from the East Side Community Center, the evening's designated heartstring tuggers. A tiny thing, no older than 7, with enormous brown eyes and 2 braids of dark hair that fell over the collar of her simple white choir robe. While the other children were fidgeting or staring wide-eyed at the splendor, she was perfectly still, her attention fixed on something in her hands, a silver chain. He saw it flash as she lifted it, a locket. Just then, the choir director clapped her hands, signaling them to assemble on the risers. As the little girl hurried to her place, the locket swung from her neck and the clasp, old and worn, gave way. It fell open as it dangled for a brief, heart-stopping second. The light from a chandelier struck the tiny photograph within, illuminating it like a miniature stage. Julian's breath caught in his throat, a sharp, painful gasp. The air in his lungs turned to ice. It was a face he saw every night in his dreams and every morning in his nightmares. The faded, sepia-toned image of a 5-year-old girl with a riot of dark curls, a missing front tooth, and a smile so full of mischief it could start a fire. And there, just by her left eye, was the mark he'd once traced with his own finger, a tiny, perfect crescent-shaped birthmark. It was Lily, his sister, vanished without a trace 25 years ago. The world around him dissolved into a meaningless roar. He took a step forward, then another, his hand outstretched, a name forming on his lips, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in decades. But the choir began to sing, a sweet, clear wave of sound that pushed him back. And the crowd shifted, their bodies forming an impassable wall between him and the girl with the ghost in her locket. He was frozen, a man drowning in a sea of smiling strangers, his entire universe having just tilted on the axis of a single, impossible photograph. The song ended. Polite, enthusiastic applause filled the ballroom, a wave of sound that felt like a physical blow. Julian pushed through the throng, his mind a frantic storm of impossibilities. "Excuse me," he muttered, shoving past a portly man in a tuxedo who shot him a dirty look. He had to get to her. He had to see the locket, the picture, the girl. But by the time he reached the small stage, the children were already being led away through a side door, a line of little white robes disappearing into the hotel's labyrinthine corridors. He saw the 2 dark braids vanish around the corner. "Wait!" he called out, his voice raw. A security guard, built like a refrigerator, put a firm hand on his chest. "Sir, you can't go back there." Julian stared at him, his eyes wild. "The girl," he said, his voice cracking. "The little girl from the choir, with the braids." The guard's expression was one of bored indifference. "They're heading back to their bus, sir. The performance is over." He was gone. The opportunity, the miracle, had slipped through his fingers as quickly as it had appeared. He stumbled back into the main ballroom, the hum of conversation now an unbearable torment. He found his way to a deserted balcony overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. The cool night air did nothing to calm the fire in his chest. Lily. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a phantom conjured by grief and 2 glasses of overpriced champagne. But he knew it wasn't. He knew that smile. He knew that birthmark. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire of code and algorithms, a world of logic and predictable outcomes, all as a fortress against the chaos that had stolen his family. In 1 second, a 7-year-old girl had smashed it all to pieces. He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking so violently he could barely unlock it. He scrolled to a single name, Marcus Thorne. He hit dial. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Tell me you're not calling from that circus." "I need you, Marcus," Julian said, the words coming out in a rush. "I need you right now." There was a pause on the other end. Marcus Thorne had been his private investigator, his fixer, his professional ghost for over a decade. He had found stolen intellectual property, vetted ruthless business partners, and located people who desperately wanted to remain lost. But he had never in all those years heard this tone in Julian's voice. "What's wrong, Julian? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Julian leaned against the cold stone of the balcony, the city lights blurring through the sudden tears in his eyes. "I think I just did," he whispered. "I think I just found Lily." The next morning, the sterile white and gray minimalism of Julian's penthouse apartment felt like a prison. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of a world that continued on as normal, while his had been thrown into utter chaos. He hadn't slept. He had paced the polished concrete floors all night, the image of the locket seared into his mind. Marcus arrived at precisely 8 a.m., looking as rumpled and cynical as ever. He was a man who seemed to be permanently at odds with the world, his face a roadmap of late nights and bad coffee. He poured himself a mug from Julian's ridiculously complex coffee machine without asking, and took a sip. "Okay," he said, his voice a low rumble. "From the top. And don't leave anything out." Julian recounted the story, his voice strained, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He described the girl, the locket, the impossible photograph. He explained the gut-wrenching certainty, the feeling that went beyond logic, a primal recognition that had shaken him to his core. Marcus listened without interruption, his gaze sharp and analytical, his expression unreadable. When Julian finished, Marcus took another long sip of coffee. "A locket," he said, his tone flat. "A blurry photo seen from 30 feet away in a crowded ballroom." "It wasn't blurry," Julian insisted, his fists clenching. "I saw it, Marcus. It was her." "You see her everywhere, Julian," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. "For 25 years you've seen her in every crowd, on every playground. This feels different, I get it, but we have to be realistic." "Find the girl," Julian demanded, his voice low and intense. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you have to do. Get the security footage from the hotel, the guest list, the program from the gala. The choir was from the East Side Community Center. Start there. I want her name, her address, everything. I want it yesterday." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He knew that look in Julian's eyes. It was the same obsessive, relentless focus that had made him a billionaire before he was 30. Once Julian locked onto a problem, he didn't let go. "All right, Julian, all right, I'm on it. But I'm telling you now, you need to brace yourself. The odds that this is what you think it is, they're astronomical. This could be a coincidence. The locket could have been found, bought, inherited. The girl in the photo might just look like her. You're chasing a ghost, and you need to be prepared for the fact that that's all she is." Julian walked to the window, staring down at the city below. The cars were like insects, the people insignificant specks, all moving with purpose, all with lives and families and connections. He had all the money in the world, a kingdom of glass and steel, but he was utterly alone. "Just find her, Marcus," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." Her name was Maya. She was 7 years old. She lived with her grandmother, Elena, in a small third-floor apartment in a crumbling brick building in the East Side, a world away from Julian's penthouse. Their apartment was filled with the scent of old books and chamomile tea. The furniture was worn but lovingly cared for, the walls covered in Maya's colorful drawings. Maya sat at the small kitchen table, carefully drawing a picture of a cat with rainbow-colored wings. The silver locket was back around her neck, its chain secured with a small piece of string where the clasp had broken. It was her most prized possession. "Abuela," she said, not looking up from her drawing. "Why was Mommy sad in her picture?" Elena, a woman with kind eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis, paused from her task of kneading dough on a floured countertop. She looked at her granddaughter, a wave of love and sorrow washing over her. "She wasn't sad, mi amor," she said softly. "She was just thinking. She had a lot on her mind." "Was she thinking about me?" "Always," Elena said, her voice catching slightly. "She was always thinking about you." The locket had belonged to Maya's mother, Anya. It was the only thing Anya had left her. Anya had died 3 years ago, her body finally succumbing to a sickness that had haunted her for years, a fragility that seemed to reside deeper than her bones. Elena had been raising Maya ever since. The woman in the locket, Anya had told Maya, was her. It was a picture of her as a little girl before she came to the city. Anya's own past was a fog, a collection of fragmented images and feelings with no story to connect them. She remembered being found, a terrified teenager, at a bus station on the other side of the state. She remembered the name Anya, but nothing else. Not her parents, not her home, not how she had gotten there. The locket was the only tangible link to a life she couldn't recall. Over the years, she had built a new life. She had met Elena, who had taken her in like a daughter. She had fallen in love, had Maya, and then lost Maya's father to a construction accident before she was even born. She had been a wonderful mother, full of fierce, protective love. But there was always a shadow behind her eyes, a quiet, persistent grief for a family she couldn't remember losing. She would hold the locket for hours, staring at the little girl's face, as if trying to will the memories back into existence. Now it was Maya who did the staring. She would trace the face with her small finger, whispering secrets to the girl who was her mother, the girl with the funny, happy, sad smile. She didn't know about the birthmark, or the name Lily, or the millionaire whose entire world was about to collide with hers. She just knew that the locket held her mother's love, and that was all that mattered. Marcus was good. He was brutally, efficiently good. Within 24 hours, he had a file on Julian's desk. It contained a name, Maya Castillo, an address, a school record, and a grainy, pixelated still from the hotel's security camera of the little girl with the 2 dark braids. Julian stared at the image, his heart pounding. Even in the poor quality photo, he could see the locket, a tiny glint of silver against the white of her robe. The file also contained a brief, tragic summary of Anya Castillo, deceased, and Elena Castillo, her legal guardian. Her mother, Anya, died of complications from pneumonia 3 years ago, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. According to the records, Anya was a ward of the state. Showed up in foster care at 15 with no memory of her past. Amnesia, probably trauma-induced. They were never able to identify her or find any family. She aged out of the system, worked odd jobs, lived a hard life. Julian felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Could it be? Could Lily have survived whatever had happened, only to live a life of poverty and anonymity, and then die before he could ever find her? The thought was a physical pain, a knife twisting in his gut. The girl in the locket, her mother. That would make Maya his niece. The idea was staggering, a possibility so immense it threatened to shatter him. What about her father? Julian asked, his voice hoarse. Died before she was born. It's just the girl and her grandmother. Marcus slid another photo across the desk. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance. Maya was on a playground, swinging on a swing set, her face alight with pure, childish joy. Her grandmother, Elena, was watching from a bench, a small, weary smile on her face. Julian picked up the photo, his fingers trembling. The resemblance to Lily was there, in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. It was faint, diluted, but it was there. "What do we do now?" Julian asked, looking at Marcus, his eyes pleading. "We tread carefully," Marcus said, his tone firm. "You can't just roll up in your Bentley and announce you might be her long-lost uncle. You'll scare them to death. These are proud people, Julian. They're not going to be impressed by your money. In fact, it'll probably do the opposite. We need a strategy. We need to approach this slowly." "I can't be slow," Julian said, the desperation rising in his voice. "I've been waiting 25 years, Marcus. I can't wait another day." "You have to," Marcus insisted. "If this is real, you have one chance to get it right. Don't blow it." But Julian wasn't listening. He was staring at the photo of the little girl on the swing, his niece, and a fierce, protective wave of emotion washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He had lost his sister. He wasn't going to lose her daughter, too. He would get it right. He had to. He would find a way in. He would create a pretense, an excuse to be in their world. He looked at the name of the community center that had sponsored the choir. The East Side Community Center. His foundation had donated to them before, a faceless transaction handled by his accountants. Now it was going to be his key. He would make a donation, a big one, in person. The East Side Community Center was a riot of noise and color, a vibrant, chaotic hub of life that felt a universe away from Julian's silent, orderly world. The walls were covered in children's art. The air smelled of floor wax and simmering soup from the community kitchen. A group of seniors were playing a boisterous game of bingo in the main hall. Julian, dressed down in jeans and a simple gray sweater that still cost more than most people's rent, felt deeply, uncomfortably out of place. He had arranged the meeting with the center's director, a harried but kind woman named Maria, under the guise of discussing a new grant for their after-school arts program. As she led him on a tour, Julian scanned every room, every hallway, searching for a small face with two dark braids. His heart leaped every time he saw a child of a similar size, only to fall again when it wasn't her. They passed the gymnasium, where a kid's basketball game was in full swing, the squeak of sneakers and the shouts of children echoing off the walls. And then he saw her. Maya was sitting on the bleachers, a book in her lap, completely engrossed, oblivious to the chaos around her. The silver locket was nestled at her throat. Julian stopped in his tracks, his conversation with Maria fading into background noise. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She looked up, as if sensing his gaze, and their eyes met for a brief second. Her expression was one of simple curiosity. She gave him a small, shy smile before turning back to her book. It was a smile that nearly broke his heart. It was Lily's smile. "Mr. Croft?" Maria's voice broke through his reverie. "Are you all right?" "Yes, fine," Julian said, forcing his attention back to her. "The program, I want to fund it. Fully, for the next 5 years. And I want to set up a new scholarship." For college. For children from this center. Maria stared at him, her mouth agape. The amount he was casually offering was enough to change the lives of hundreds of children. I don't know what to say, Mr. Croft. That's incredibly generous. I have one condition, Julian said, his gaze drifting back to the little girl on the bleachers. I'd like to be involved, not just as a name on a check. I want to volunteer, maybe read to the children. Something. He needed a reason to be here, a legitimate way to get close to her grandmother. Maria's eyes welled with tears. We would be honored to have you, she said, and just like that, he was in. The first piece of his plan had fallen into place. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, signing papers and discussing logistics, all while his mind was on the little girl on the bleachers. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a billionaire playing the part of a philanthropist, all to get closer to a 7-year-old girl who held the key to his past. The thought filled him with a strange mix of hope and shame. He was manipulating them, there was no denying it. But the alternative, the thought of walking away from that little girl, from the ghost of his sister, was simply unbearable. He would do whatever it took. The first reading session was a week later. Julian sat in a small, brightly colored chair, surrounded by a semicircle of fidgeting, chattering first graders. He felt more nervous than he had during his company's IPO. Maya was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her chin resting on her hands, her big brown eyes watching him with a quiet intensity. He had chosen the book carefully, an old classic from his own childhood, a story about a lost bear searching for his home. As he read, his voice grew more confident. He gave the characters different voices, his deep baritone rising and falling with the story's gentle drama. The children were captivated. He found himself getting lost in the story, too, in the simple, profound narrative of loss and belonging. Every so often, his eyes would meet Maya's. She wasn't smiling, but she was listening intently, her gaze never leaving his face. When the story was over, the other children erupted in questions and comments. But Maya remained silent. As the kids were dismissed for snack time, she slowly approached him. She stood before him, clutching her book from the bleachers to her chest. "That was a good story," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "Thank you," Julian said, his heart beating a little faster. "I'm glad you liked it." He could see the locket up close now. It was old, the silver tarnished, with tiny, intricate engravings of vines and leaves. It was the one. He was sure of it. He had given it to Lily for her 5th birthday, a month before she disappeared. He had saved up his allowance for 6 months to buy it for her from a small antique shop. "That's a beautiful locket," he said, his voice carefully casual. Maya's hand immediately went to it, her fingers closing around it protectively. "It was my mom's," she said. "She gave it to me. She must have loved you very much." Maya nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "She did." Just then, an older woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a warm smile appeared in the doorway. It was Elena. She looked exactly like she had in Marcus's photograph. "Maya, mi amor, it's time to go." Maya ran to her grandmother, taking her hand. Elena looked at Julian, her expression polite but questioning. "Thank you for reading to the children," she said, her voice laced with a faint accent. "You have a kind way with them." "It was my pleasure," Julian said, standing up. He felt an overwhelming urge to tell her everything, to pour out the whole impossible story. But Marcus's warning echoed in his mind. "Tread carefully. Don't blow it." He introduced himself simply as Julian, a volunteer. Elena introduced herself and Maya. The interaction was brief, polite, and utterly agonizing for Julian. He watched them walk down the hallway, hand in hand, a little girl and her grandmother, a self-contained world of love and history. A history he was now certain he was a part of. He had made contact. He had spoken to her. It was a start. But the chasm between his world and theirs still felt vast and insurmountable. He needed more than a reading session. He needed to talk to Elena. He needed to hear the story of her daughter, Anya. He needed to find a way to ask about the locket without revealing the storm of hope and grief that was raging inside him. The opportunity came a week later, in the most unexpected way. Julian had become a regular fixture at the community center, his reading sessions a popular weekly event. He was getting to know the children, their names, their personalities. He was even starting to feel useful. It was a novel sensation. One afternoon he was leaving the center when he saw Elena struggling up the front steps, carrying 2 heavy bags of groceries. Her face was pale, and she was breathing heavily. Julian rushed to her side. "Please let me help you with that," he said, reaching for the bags. Elena looked startled, then reluctant. No, I'm fine, young man." "I insist," Julian said, gently taking the bags from her. They were heavier than he'd expected. "You live nearby, don't you? I can walk you home." Elena looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She was a woman who had learned to be wary, to rely only on herself. But she was also tired, and the kindness in this handsome stranger's eyes seemed genuine. "All right," she said, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "Thank you." The walk to her apartment building was mostly silent. Julian commented on the weather. Elena asked about his day. The small talk felt absurd to Julian, a flimsy curtain over the seismic questions he was desperate to ask. When they reached her building, he carried the bags up the 3 flights of stairs, his own expensive tailored suit feeling ridiculous in the dimly lit, worn-out hallway. Inside, the apartment was small and cluttered, but immaculately clean. Maya was at the kitchen table doing her homework. Her face lit up when she saw them. "Julian," she exclaimed, a hint of surprise and pleasure in her voice. "Abuela, look, it's the story man." Elena bustled into the kitchen to put away the groceries. "Mr. Julian was kind enough to help me with the bags," she explained. "Would you like to stay for some tea, Mr. Julian? It's the least I can do." This was it. This was his chance. "I'd love to," he said. He sat at the small table with Maya while Elena prepared the tea. Maya showed him her drawing, a detailed portrait of the lost bear from the story he had read. He told her it was wonderful, and he meant it. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine, uncomplicated moment of connection. Elena brought the tea, setting a steaming mug in front of him. She sat down, her movements slow and deliberate. "You are very good with the children," she said. "It is a gift." "They're great kids," Julian replied. He took a sip of tea. It was strong and sweet. "Maya told me the locket she wears was her mother's." He tried to make the statement sound casual, a simple observation. Elena's smile faded slightly. She nodded, her gaze becoming distant. Yes, it was Anya's. It was the only thing she had from before. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. "Before?" he prompted gently. Elena sighed, a long, mournful sound. She looked at Maya, who was now absorbed in her drawing again, and lowered her voice. "My Anya. She didn't have an easy life. She was a foster child. I met her when she was just a teenager, working at the diner where I was a cook. She was so lost, so fragile, like a little bird with a broken wing." She began to tell him the story of a girl found at a bus station, with no memory, no past, no family. The story of a quiet, sad young woman who was haunted by a life she couldn't remember. "She had no idea who she was or where she came from," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. The They tried to find her family, but it was like she had just appeared out of thin air. All she had was that locket. She said she thought the picture inside was of her mother, or maybe herself as a baby. She wasn't sure. Her memories were like a broken mirror, just little pieces that didn't fit together. Julian listened, his hands gripping his mug so tightly his knuckles were white. Every word was a confirmation, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Amnesia, a lost child. It all fit. This was Lily. His Lily. She had survived. She had lived a whole life without him. A hard life. And now she was gone. The grief was a fresh, raw wound. He had found her, only to find out he was too late. But then there was Maya, her daughter, his niece. She must have been a wonderful person, Julian said, his voice thick. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She was the best, she whispered, so strong, so full of love for her little girl. She wanted to give Maya everything she never had, a home, a family, safety. Julian looked at Maya, who was humming softly to herself as she colored. A fierce, powerful resolve settled over him. His sister was gone. He couldn't change that. He couldn't take back the lost years or the hardships she had endured. But he could honor her memory. He could fulfill her wish. He could give her daughter everything. He would protect her. He would provide for her. He would be the family she and her mother had lost. He didn't know how he was going to do it. He didn't know how he would bridge the gap between their two worlds. But as he sat in that small, humble kitchen, surrounded by the scent of tea and the evidence of a life lived with love but without privilege, he made a silent vow to his lost sister. He would not fail her again. Julian's visits to the Castillo apartment became a regular occurrence. He used the excuse of helping Maya with her reading, but soon the pretense fell away. He would simply show up, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes with a new book for Maya, sometimes with nothing but his time. He was drawn to the simple, quiet warmth of their home, a warmth that was entirely absent in his own life. Elena remained cautious, her politeness a shield against a world that had taught her to expect very little. She couldn't understand why this wealthy, handsome man was taking such an interest in them. Was it pity? A rich man's hobby? But as the weeks went by, she saw the genuine affection in his eyes when he looked at Maya. She saw the way he listened, truly listened, when Maya chattered on about her day. He wasn't condescending or patronizing. He was just there. And Maya adored him. He was this fascinating, gentle giant who knew all the best stories and could explain how fractions worked in a way that actually made sense. She started calling him Uncle Julian, a name she coined herself one afternoon that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy through Julian's heart. He was playing a dangerous game, he knew. He was weaving himself into the fabric of their lives under a false identity. Marcus called him daily, his voice a constant, nagging reminder of the truth. You have to tell them, Julian. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the kid. She's getting attached. I know, Julian would say, but not yet. It's not the right time. He was terrified that the truth would shatter the fragile trust he had built. Terrified that they would see him not as Julian, the story man, but as a liar. Or worse, as a threat. What if Elena tried to stop him from seeing Maya? What if his wealth, the very thing he thought would solve all their problems, became an insurmountable barrier? So he waited, telling himself he was looking for the perfect moment, the perfect way to explain the impossible. He commissioned Marcus to do a deeper dive into Anya's past. I want to know everything, he told him. Every foster home she was in. Every school she attended. Every doctor she saw. There has to be a record, a clue, something that tells me what happened to her after. after she disappeared. He wanted to give Maya a complete picture of her mother. He wanted to give her the story that Anya herself had never been able to tell. It was while Marcus was digging through the dusty, labyrinthine archives of the state social services that the first inconsistency appeared. It was small, almost insignificant. A date on a medical intake form from the first group home Anya was placed in. The doctor had noted her approximate age as 15 and estimated her date of birth. But the date she was officially admitted to the state's care was almost 6 months after the date Lily had disappeared. "It could be a clerical error," Marcus said over the phone. "God knows these records are a mess. Or it could mean she was on the streets for a while before they found her." But it bothered Julian. It was a loose thread in a story that he desperately needed to be seamless. Then Marcus found something else. A psychological evaluation from when Anya was 16. In it, the therapist noted Anya's recurring nightmares. She would dream of fire, of screaming, of running through a dark forest. But she also dreamed of another girl. A girl with a bright, mischievous smile and a crescent-shaped birthmark by her eye. In the dream, Anya was trying to give the girl something important, but the girl kept running away from her, disappearing into the smoke. The therapist had dismissed it as a trauma-induced fantasy, a manifestation of Anya's own lost identity. But to Julian, it was a bombshell. Why would Anya dream of a girl with Lily's birthmark? If Anya was Lily, why would she see herself as a separate person in her dreams? The certainty he had felt, the bedrock on which he had been building this new future, began to crack. A cold, terrifying thought started to form in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if this whole time he had been chasing the wrong ghost? He tried to push the thought away, to dismiss it as fear and paranoia. The locket. The locket was the proof. It was hers. He had given it to her. There was no other explanation, but the doubt, once planted, began to grow. A poisonous vine wrapping itself around his heart. He had to know for sure. There was one way to find out. A way that was definitive, scientific, and undeniable. It was also a profound violation of trust. He called Marcus. "I need you to get me a sample of Maya's DNA," he said, the words feeling like acid in his mouth. "A hair from her brush, a cup she drank from, I don't care what it is. And I need you to run it against mine." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "Don't do this. Don't go down this road." "I have to know, Marcus," Julian said, his voice breaking. "I have to be sure." He hated himself for it. He hated the deception, the cold, clinical nature of it. But the not knowing was a torment he could no longer bear. He had to know if the little girl who called him uncle was truly his blood, his family. He had to know if he had found his sister's legacy, or if he was just a desperate man clinging to a beautiful, heartbreaking mirage. The days that followed were agonizing. Julian continued his visits, continued reading stories, and helping with homework. But a new tension underscored every interaction. He felt like a spy in the house of love. Every smile from Maya, every cup of tea from Elena was a fresh stab of guilt. He found himself studying Maya's face, searching for definitive proof of his sister, a feature so undeniably Lily's that it would render the test unnecessary. But he saw both everything and nothing. The shape of her ears, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. It was all so familiar. But was it Lily? Or was it just his desperate, grief-stricken mind projecting a ghost onto a living child? Marcus obtained the sample with unnerving ease. A disposable cup Maya had used at the community center. It was sent to a private lab, one that specialized in discretion and speed. The results would be back in 72 hours. 72 hours that stretched into an eternity. On the third day, Julian was at the apartment, helping Maya build a ridiculously complex Lego castle. Elena was in the kitchen, humming a soft tune as she cooked dinner. The apartment was filled with the warm, comforting smell of garlic and tomatoes. It felt like home. More of a home than his sterile penthouse had ever been. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Marcus. One word. Results. His blood ran cold. He excused himself, stepping out into the hallway, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He called Marcus. "Tell me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's negative, Julian. There's no match. She's not your niece. I'm sorry." The hallway seemed to tilt, the floor dropping out from under him. The words didn't make sense. Negative. No match. It was impossible. The locket. The photo. The stories. It had all fit so perfectly. "Run it again," he said, his voice hollow. "There's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "The lab is the best in the business. They ran it twice. There is a 0% chance that Maya Castillo is your biological niece." Julian leaned against the wall. The cheerful sounds from the apartment, Maya's laughter, Elena's humming, seeming to come from a great distance. It was all a lie. A grand, elaborate coincidence. He wasn't her uncle. He was just a stranger. A delusional billionaire who had forced his way into their lives based on a fantasy. The fragile world he had built over the past few weeks came crashing down, leaving him in a pile of rubble. Who was he now? What was his role in their lives? He had no claim on them, no right to be there. The shame was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He wanted to run, to disappear, to go back to his empty penthouse and his empty life and never see them again. It would be less painful than facing them with this devastating truth. But then he heard Maya call his name from inside the apartment. "Uncle Julian, are you coming back? The castle needs its king." He closed his eyes, the sound of her voice, the innocent trust in it, piercing through his despair. He had lied to them. He had deceived them. But the feelings, the connection, the love that had grown in his heart for this little girl and her grandmother, that was real. It wasn't based on biology, but on shared stories and quiet afternoons and building Lego castles. What did a DNA test mean in the face of that? He was not her uncle, but he was her Julian. He took a deep, shuddering breath, opened the door, and walked back inside. A fractured man trying to piece himself back together. The truth was a disaster. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning of a different one. He had to know the truth. Not his truth, the one he had constructed out of grief and hope, but the real truth. If Anya wasn't Lily, then who was she? And how, in all the world, did she end up with his sister's locket? The mystery was no longer about finding his family. It was about honoring the memory of a woman he had never met, a woman whose life had become inextricably tangled with his own. He put Marcus back on the case, but with a new, more urgent mandate. "Forget about my sister for a minute," Julian said, his voice filled with a new, somber determination. "I want you to find out who Anya Castillo really was. There has to be a clue, a record, something we missed. The dream she had about the girl with the birthmark. What if Anya wasn't dreaming about herself? What if she was dreaming about a real person? A friend?" Marcus, sensing the shift in Julian's focus from obsession to a genuine quest for answers, redoubled his efforts. He went back to the source, to the town where Anya had first appeared. He pulled old police blotters, talked to retired social workers, chased down leads that were a quarter of a century old. He was looking for a ghost, but a different one this time. And then he found it. a single, brittle piece of paper in a forgotten file box in the basement of the county courthouse. It was a missing child report, filed a week after Anya had been found. The report had been misfiled, lost in the bureaucratic shuffle, and never connected to the amnesiac Jane Doe who had been entered into the foster system. The report was for a 9-year-old girl named Anya Mironov. It included a grainy, photocopied picture, a girl with dark, haunted eyes. But the most important part was the text. Anya Mironov had disappeared along with her best friend, a 5-year-old girl named Lily Croft. They had been living at the same address, the St. Jude's Home for Children. An orphanage. Marcus called Julian immediately. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice laced with a rare excitement. Lily wasn't the only one who disappeared that day. He explained what he had found. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was both clearer and infinitely more tragic than the one Julian had imagined. His father, a man broken by the loss of his wife and the disappearance of his daughter, had never told him the full story. He had told Julian that Lily had vanished from a park, that she had been abducted. But that was a lie, a simplification of a more complex horror. The truth was that after Julian's mother died in a sudden, tragic car accident, his father had suffered a complete breakdown. He had been unable to care for his children. Julian, at 14, had been sent to a prestigious boarding school, but Lily, only 5, had been placed in an orphanage. "Just for a little while," his father had promised, "until I get back on my feet." She had been there for 3 months. She had made a friend, a slightly older, fiercely protective girl named Anya. And then, there had been a fire. A small, accidental fire in the orphanage's kitchen that had spread quickly. In the chaos and the smoke, the 2 girls had held hands and run. They had escaped the fire, but in the terrifying aftermath, in the dark woods behind the orphanage, they had been separated. Lily was never seen again. Anya was found a week later, 100 miles away, wandering by a bus station, mute with trauma. Her memory wiped clean, clutching a silver locket that her best friend had pressed into her hand for safekeeping. Julian sat in his sterile office, the phone pressed to his ear, the world dissolving around him for the second time. The story was a physical blow. His father's lies, the orphanage, the fire. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than he could have imagined. His sister hadn't been stolen in a park. She had been abandoned, placed in an institution, and lost to a tragedy his father had been too ashamed to admit. And Anya, this brave little girl who had been Lily's friend, who had tried to protect her. She had carried the token of that friendship, that last connection to his sister, for her entire life without ever knowing what it truly meant. She had lived a life of shadow and confusion, her own identity sacrificed in the chaos that had taken Lily. She hadn't stolen Lily's identity. She had become the keeper of its last remnant. The locket wasn't a clue to Lily's survival. It was a memorial. A tiny silver tombstone. Julian looked out the window, his heart an aching, hollow cavern. The grief for his sister was immense, a tidal wave he had held back for years that now came crashing down. But mingled with it was a new emotion, a profound, heartbreaking gratitude for Anya. She had been the only one to hold on to a piece of Lily. She had kept her memory alive unknowingly for 25 years, and she had passed it down to her daughter, Maya. She wasn't his niece, she wasn't his blood, but she was the legacy of his sister's only friend. She was the granddaughter of a promise made between 2 scared little girls in the dark. And in that moment, Julian knew that the DNA results didn't matter at all. His connection to Maya wasn't written in his genes. It was written in the ashes of a fire, in the loyalty of a lost little girl, and in the love that had been passed down through a simple silver locket. He had to tell Elena. He had to tell her the truth, all of it, for his sake, for Maya's, and for the memory of the woman named Anya. He asked Elena if he could speak with her alone. He suggested they meet at a small, quiet park near her apartment. He needed neutral ground, a place that wasn't freighted with the memories and assumptions of their shared fiction. She agreed, her voice on the phone laced with a hint of confusion and concern. They sat on a park bench, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Children's laughter drifted over from a nearby playground. For a long time, Julian said nothing. He just stared at his hands, trying to find the words, the right way to dismantle a world. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes full of a sorrow so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "Elena," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I haven't been honest with you." Huh. He told her everything. He started with Lily, with the sister he had lost 25 years ago. He told her about the gala, about seeing the locket and the impossible photograph. He confessed his initial, hopeful assumption that Anya was Lily, that Maya was his niece. He saw the shock, the disbelief, the confusion on Elena's face. He didn't stop. He told her about the DNA test, the negative result that had shattered his world. He saw the flicker of pain and anger in her eyes, the realization that he had taken a piece of her granddaughter, violated their trust in the most profound way. He deserved her anger. He didn't flinch from it. Then, his voice softening, he told her what Marcus had discovered. He told her about the orphanage, the fire, the friendship between two lost little girls named Lily and Anya. He told her the story of the locket, not as a stolen item, but as a cherished token, a symbol of a bond forged in fear and loyalty. He explained that Anya hadn't been a ghost with no past. She had been a hero. In the midst of an unspeakable tragedy, her last act before her own memory was shattered was to protect something for her friend. When he finished, silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Elena stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Julian's heart ached. He had laid the truth at her feet, a terrible, complicated burden. He had destroyed the simple narrative of her daughter's life and replaced it with a tragedy. He braced himself for her reaction, anger, accusations, a demand that he leave them alone and never come back. He would have understood. He would have walked away. But when Elena finally turned to look at him, her eyes were not filled with anger. They were filled with tears. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. "All these years," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All these years she felt so alone. She thought she had no one, no past, no family, but she had a friend. She had your Lily." The words were not an accusation. They were a revelation. He hadn't brought her a tragedy. He had brought her a gift. He had given her daughter a history, a context for her pain. He had given her a name, a home, a friend. He had filled in the blank pages of her life with a story of courage and love. "She used to have nightmares about a fire," Elena said, her voice choked with tears. "She would wake up screaming a name. L. She could never finish it. It was Lily. She was calling for your sister." They sat in silence for a long time, two strangers bound together by the ghosts of two little girls. The anger Julian had expected from her was replaced by a shared grief, a quiet understanding that transcended bloodlines and bank accounts. "What does this mean now, Julian?" she finally asked, her voice quiet but steady. "For us? For Maya?" This was the moment. The future of this fragile, unconventional family rested on his answer. He could offer her money, a trust fund, a new apartment. He could try to buy his way into their lives, to assuage his guilt with financial transactions. But he knew in his heart that that wasn't what they needed. It wasn't what he needed either. "It means," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name, that your daughter was my sister's keeper. It means that you and Maya are the only family I have left. Not by blood, but by something more important." He looked at her, his soul bared. "I love that little girl, Elena, and I have come to care for you more than I can say. If you'll let me, I don't want to be a benefactor. I want to be family. Whatever that looks like. I want to be in her life. In your life. If you'll have me." Elena looked at him, truly looked at him, for what felt like the first time. She saw past the wealth, the fancy clothes, the sad secret he had been carrying. She saw a man who was just as lost, just as lonely as her Anya had been. A man who was searching for a place to belong. She reached out and placed her small, wrinkled hand over his. Her touch was warm and steady. "Anya would have liked that," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She always wanted a big family. In the quiet of the park, as the sun began to set, a new kind of family was born. Not one of blood, but one of choice. Forged in loss, bound by a shared history, and built on the promise of a future they would now face together. The truth, once revealed, was not a destructive force. Instead, it was a bomb. It settled over their strange new reality, healing the parts of their stories that had been broken and incomplete. Julian, with Elena's blessing, sat down with Maya. He didn't tell her the whole tragic story. She was too young for the weight of orphanages and fires. But he told her a simpler, gentler version of the truth. He told her the story of two little girls who were the best of friends. One was his sister, Lily, and the other was her mommy, Anya. He explained that in a scary, confusing time, Lily had given Anya her most special possession, the silver locket, to keep safe. And her mommy, the bravest girl in the world, had kept it safe her entire life. Maya listened, her eyes wide, her little hand clutching the locket at her neck. She looked at the picture inside, her understanding of it shifting. The girl with the mischievous smile wasn't her mother. It was her mother's best friend. "So, my mom was a hero?" she asked, her voice full of awe. "Yes, sweetheart," Julian said, his own voice thick with tears. "She was the biggest hero I've ever known." The story gave Maya a new sense of pride, a new connection to the mother she barely remembered. Her mother wasn't just a sad, lost woman. She was a keeper of secrets, a protector of promises. It was a legacy of strength, not of sorrow, and it transformed her relationship with Julian. He wasn't a pretend uncle anymore. He was Uncle Julian, Lily's brother. He was family, connected to her through a story that was now hers. Their lives began to merge in quiet, natural ways. Julian didn't just buy them a new apartment. He helped them pick it out, a sunny, spacious place with a room just for Maya's art and a small garden for Elena. He didn't just pay for Maya's tuition at a fancy private school. He drove her there on her first day, holding her hand as they walked through the gates. He was at every school play, every parent-teacher conference. He taught Maya how to ride a bike. He helped Elena navigate the bewildering world of doctors and insurance. And they, in turn, healed him. They filled his cavernous penthouse with laughter and the smell of Elena's cooking. Maya's colorful drawings began to appear on his stainless steel refrigerator. They forced him to slow down, to be present, to find joy not in stock market fluctuations, but in building a Lego castle or reading a bedtime story. He was no longer just a billionaire. He was Julian. He was family. He finally confronted his father, who was now a frail old man living in a nursing home. He didn't go with anger, but with a quiet, sorrowful resolve. He told his father he knew the truth about Lily, about the orphanage. The old man wept, his body shaking with the guilt he had carried for a quarter of a century. It wasn't an absolution, but it was a closing of a painful chapter. a forgiveness, not for his father's sake, but for his own. He needed to let go of the anger to fully embrace his new future. One day, Marcus called him. He had been on his own, still quietly pulling on the last loose thread of the story. "I think I found her, Julian," he said, his voice hushed. "Lily." Julian's heart stopped. After everything, a part of him had never truly let go of the hope. "Where?" he breathed. "She's not alive," Marcus said gently. "I'm sorry. But I found her resting place. The fire. There was one unidentified child who perished. A little girl. The records were a mess. She was buried in a John Doe grave in the local cemetery. But I got the coroner's report exhumed. I cross-referenced the dental records with Lily's old ones from your family dentist. It's her." The news was not a blow, but a release. It was the final, painful piece of the puzzle. The ghost he had been chasing for 25 years finally had a name, a place, a finality. He, Elena, and Maya went to the small, overgrown cemetery a week later. They stood before a simple, unmarked stone. Julian had it replaced with a new one, carved with her name, Lily Croft, beloved sister and friend. They laid flowers on the grave. Maya placed her hand on the cool stone. "Thank you for being my mom's friend, Lily," she whispered. Julian stood between Elena and Maya, holding their hands. The grief was still there, a dull ache in his chest. But it was no longer a lonely grief. He was not a solitary man mourning a ghost. He was the head of a family, honoring a memory. That evening, as they sat together in the living room of their new home, Maya came to Julian with the locket in her hand. I think Lily would want you to have this back now," she said, her expression serious. Julian knelt down in front of her. He looked at the locket, the symbol of so much pain and hope, the catalyst for their entire story. He gently closed her hand over it. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft. "Your mom kept it safe for Lily. Now it's your turn. You are the keeper of the story. You keep it safe for all of us." He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, the acceptance of this solemn, beautiful responsibility. She was the link between the past and the future, the living memory of two little girls who had been lost but were, in their own way, now found. He had started his journey searching for a ghost, a missing piece of his own life. He had thought that finding his sister or her child would make him whole. But he had been wrong. Wholeness wasn't about finding what was lost. It was about building something new from the broken pieces. He looked at Elena, her face serene as she watched them. He looked at Maya, this bright, resilient little girl who was the heart of their new world. He was not a brother, not a biological uncle. He was something more. He was a choice, a promise, a family, built not on the certainty of blood, but on the surprising, miraculous grace of a second chance. And as Maya carefully fastened the silver locket back around her neck, its tarnished surface glowing in the lamplight, Julian Croft knew, with a certainty that went deeper than any DNA test, that he was finally, truly home.